So what we're going to do, mixed in with the unit we're currently doing with the marathon runner, is also work through our notes on homeostasis. And what we're going to do in this unit is sort of talk about various body systems in humans and other animals, how these systems help to maintain homeostasis, how they work together. So I know it is a thick packet of notes. I will go through it pretty quickly because I made it so that you have not very much to write down. So we'll talk about these things. We'll talk about lots of malfunctions of the systems and things like that. But you actually don't have a whole lot that you need to write down. So first off, homeostasis as a concept, what does it actually mean? Like what if you had to define homeostasis? What would you say? Maintaining equilibrium, maintaining maybe balance, keeping proper conditions for the organism's health. Those would be good definitions. So oftentimes when asked for a definition, though, students will give an example. So keeping a constant body temperature, that's an example of homeostasis, but there's many other examples of how organisms maintain equilibrium other than just body temperature. That's just one example. So that's not a definition, that's an example. So but let's think about body temperature. What is average human body temperature? That's what they say. Recent research, however, shows it's actually significantly lower than that today. That 98.6 number came from the middle of the 19th century. And at that time, compared to today, so in the United States, I think it's probably more than a degree cooler is typical average body temperature. Because during the middle of the 19th century, there's a lot more sort of chronic infection and also inflammation, which would artificially elevate the temperature of people, the subjects that they're measuring it from. So I think it's actually lower today. Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of people that is lower than. Does anyone take a temperature like you're always below that? No. 98.6? The other thing is those thermometers are maybe not necessarily calibrated to an actual temperature, but calibrated to sort of a healthy person's body temperature, so maybe not quite accurate. So anyway, is your body temperature the same all day? No. Yeah. No. But don't you maintain homeostasis? Yeah. Because by sugar. Right. Actually, your body goes through natural variations. Like at night, that's when it's natural. At night, your body temperature drops down. Okay? It's significantly cooler at nighttime. It rises during the daytime when you're more active, but that's normal. It doesn't mean that your body's not maintaining homeostasis, but it's maintaining it within a certain range. That concept is called dynamic equilibrium. Same thing with our blood glucose level. Is it constant all day? No, it goes up and down, it fluctuates, but our body maintains our blood glucose levels within a specific range that keeps us healthy. So it doesn't necessarily mean a constant level. It means a normal, healthy level. That's what homeostasis is. On this unit, we're going to sort of talk a lot about humans and other organisms, but all organisms maintain homeostasis, even bacteria, even a single-celled protist. They all need to maintain certain conditions in order to stay alive. So, as an example, here's a paramecium. Now, a paramecium doesn't have a circulatory system or excretory system or any other system. It's just one cell. So what does it actually have then that allows it to maintain homeostasis? Yeah, it has, what do we call those things? Cilia. It has lysosomes. Yeah, it has organelles. They function sort of as almost like our organs do. These organelles function like that. So even unicellular, simple organisms still have ways of maintaining homeostasis. They don't have tissues and organs and organ systems, but they do have organelles that do that. This is actually a common question on the Regents exam about comparing organ systems in an animal to organelles in a single-celled organism. So, to obtain energy, we have the digestive system, obviously, for us to break down materials, get nutrients. A single-celled organism has a lysosome. Do you remember anything about the lysosome? Small little sort of vesicles that contain something. They contain enzymes which digest things. So that's kind of like a digestive system for a single-celled organism. We have a respiratory system for taking in oxygen. Now, obviously, a unicellular organism doesn't, but it can absorb oxygen through diffusion of the cell membrane. So the cell membrane sort of acts as the lungs of the single-celled organism. We have a circulatory system to move things around within our body. Single-celled organ has the cytoplasm, which material can move through, or the ER, which can transport things to move things through. So there are these equivalents in single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms. We get rid of waste in an excretory system, our kidneys. Single-celled organisms, waste just sort of diffuses typically through the cell membrane. We breathe out carbon dioxide. That diffuses out through the cell membrane as well. We have ways of taking in information, stimuli from the outside environment and responding. We have a nervous system to do that. Unicellular life, they have a cytoskeleton that allows them to move. They have receptor molecules that can listen for signals from the outside. They have receptor molecules that can sense things like light, and chemicals that are in their surroundings. They have ways of taking in information as well. Our endocrine system internally regulates and keeps things balanced. Unicellular life have their DNA, their genes, which get turned on and off. They have enzymes which allow it. We have an immune system for fighting off invading cells. Unicellular life has that lysosome. Break down, destroy pathogens as they come into the cell. So we have these equivalents. Even though multicellular animals are much more complex and have larger systems for doing these things, it's still the same functions need to happen in unicellular organisms as well. So we're going to be talking today about gas exchange. Yeah, you're going to have to flip. This is, I've rearranged the sections a bit to match our marathon runner unit. Probably is it midway through the packet or so? So for every single function, we're going to sort of talk about the same one. We're going to talk a little bit about plants, a little bit about unicellular life, a little bit about different types of animals, and then eventually we'll talk mostly about food. So let's talk about plants. Do plants need any gases? What do plants need? You certainly need carbon dioxide for what? Photosynthesis. But they also need oxygen. For what? For respiration. So we know from our previous study of plants and photosynthesis that the leaves of plants have openings called stomata. Their function is to take in what? Air. Well, but what do they need from the air? In the leaves, they need carbon dioxide. Why would they close then?
keep water.
Yes. Prevent water loss. All right, so yeah, the stomata open and closed by the guard cells. So they allow atmospheric gases in so that carbon dioxide can reach the cells where photosynthesis is taking place. There's also other ways of gases getting into plants. Have you ever seen like these horizontal sort of look like slashes in the trunk of a tree? This is a birch tree. Those are actually openings that lead into the stem of the tree that allow gases to come in. They're called lenticels. Lots of trees have very prominent lenticels. Some you can't really see, but some you can. Also, the root hairs, these tiny little very fine hairs, the roots of plants, they can absorb oxygen and other materials. They have a very high surface area. That's why overwatering plants can kill them, because if those roots are constantly sitting in water, they can't get enough oxygen. Bacteria, protists, fungi, they get their gases basically just through diffusion. Okay? Because they can absorb those gases through their cell membrane. That's how they obtain oxygen or other gases. Let's talk about animals. Did we look at these in 7th grade? I think we did. The Hydra, it's related to jellyfish, has tentacles, stinging cells. The Hydra is a pretty simple animal. It's an area. It's related to jellyfish. But it gets its gases just through diffusion. Because it's very small, it's only 2 cells thick. Basically, every cell is in contact with the water, so every cell can absorb gases directly through that water. Earthworms. Earthworms, they need oxygen. They're animals. They can absorb oxygen through their skin. Okay, their skin is moist with a layer of mucus around it that facilitates the absorption of oxygen. And what's interesting about earthworms is their blood, they don't have red blood cells. Right? Instead, their hemoglobin is just in the plasma. And the hemoglobin is what holds on to the oxygen. And basically, capillaries touch each one of their cells to supply the oxygen to the actual cell. So they absorb oxygen to the capillaries and then it can be distributed. They have blood, but no red blood cells in it. So we have red blood cells floating along in our plasma. The red blood cells are what latch on to oxygen and carry it. For earthworms, that's just in the plasma, not in the cells.
So what if like a specific part of the body needs oxygen? How do they just?
It's just distributed to all the parts through the blood. Grasshoppers and insects. Did we look at grasshoppers in 7th grade?
Yeah.
So if you looked in their abdomen, there were those little dots on their abdomen. They were called spiracles. Those dots were openings which allow gases to come in to the tissue of the grasshopper. And those spiracles are directly connected to the muscle, so air can get right into the muscle tissue to provide oxygen to that muscle tissue. Remember, there was a question on that activity about why can't you drown a grasshopper by putting its head underwater? It doesn't breathe through its mouth. It breathes through these spiracles that are in the abdomen.
Really ingenious.
You could see them here also in this caterpillar. They're like this orangish color in the slits. That's allowing gases into the body of that.
Does that have a negative?
Not really.
So if like part of the body was in the water.
Yeah, if like the body were in the water, it'd be like,
Part.
yep. Then some parts would not be getting oxygen. And again, grasshoppers, insects, their blood doesn't carry oxygen. The oxygen just goes directly into their muscle. Fish have gills, obviously. Gills are adapted to taking oxygen out of the water, steaming gases. They have to have a constant flow of water over them in order to function. They're covered with this hard sort of protective plate called the operculum that protects them because they're very fragile. You can see in this diagram, they're very thin and very fine, these filaments, very delicate. It's also why what happens when a fish comes out of the water, what happens to those little filaments? They just kind of collapse, right? There's not the water to hold them up and support them. So when a fish comes out of the water, they kind of just collapse, and the fish can't effectively get oxygen. Now humans, we'll talk the rest of the time about humans. So humans, in order to obtain the gases we need, have a respiratory system. Okay? So our lungs, this is, when we see like a diagram or a picture of our lungs, this is a picture of the lungs, we kind of get a perception that they're like a solid thing, or they're like a hollow balloon that just deflates and deflates.
They are.
That's not what they are. So what they really are, if you follow the pathway of air, down the bronchi, the bronchioles, into the lungs are basically a series of very fine branches, and at the end of each of these tubes is a little cluster of what are called alveoli. Alveoli are little air sacs. You can see they look like kind of a cluster of grapes. So each tube, as it branches off, eventually ends in one of these alveoli. These alveoli are where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide happens. Because the outside of these alveoli are surrounded by a layer of capillaries, tiny, tiny little blood vessels. So as we inhale and breathe in air, air goes through the bronchi, bronchioles, into ends in these little air sacs. They inflate with air from the outside, and when they do that, oxygen can diffuse into the blood. Okay, because the oxygen level of the air we breathed in is higher than the oxygen level in our blood here, and so it diffuses in. At the same time, carbon dioxide that's in our blood is higher than the air we breathed in, so it diffuses into these air sacs so that we can then exhale it. So it moves into and out of our blood, these gases, through just simple diffusion.
So is there thousands of
Hundreds of millions. So we'll talk about that a little bit more detail. So just to think about taking in and breathing a respiratory system. So we can breathe through our nose, obviously, through our nasal cavity. Our nasal cavity and most of our upper respiratory system are, the inside is filled with little hairs. Okay, you can see them in our nose, and mucus. Okay. And the purpose of those hairs and mucus is to trap any contaminants in the air, any matter floating around, any allergens or things like that. Much of that can be trapped by our nose hairs, by that mucus in our upper respiratory system.
What if we breathe in?
You can. So obviously you can also breathe through your mouth. The air doesn't get filtered as much as breathing through your nose. It doesn't get, as the air goes through our nasal passage, it gets warmed slightly, and which also makes a difference, allows gases to be exchanged easier. That's why, typically breathing through your nose is better. But our nose connects to our throat, what we would call our pharynx. The pharynx is sort of the back of your mouth area. Your nasal cavity connects in the back of your throat with your pharynx. So the air you breathe in goes there. At the bottom of the pharynx is also where our vocal cords are, our larynx, our voice box. You have in there your vocal cords, which you can tighten or loosen with muscles, which allow you to make different pitches of sound. And so as air passes over your vocal cords can change the pitch, but also your mouth and your tongue can shape the vibrations as well, allowing you to make different sounds. So you can both your vocal cords and your mouth together make all the sounds that you make. Then the back of the pharynx leads to the trachea, sometimes called the windpipe. So the windpipe, as you can see here, comes down through your neck. It has these rings of cartilage around it to sort of reinforce it. Obviously, it's really important that your trachea stays intact, stays open. If it gets blocked, if it gets damaged, then you're not able to get oxygen into your lungs, which can be dangerous. The trachea is also lined with mucus and cilia to help filter the air that's going in. Has a little cover on the top, the epiglottis. The epiglottis is sort of like a flap that stops any food or other material from getting into your trachea when it shouldn't. When you swallow a bite of food or take a sip of water, the flap of the epiglottis closes, so none of that goes down your trachea. That doesn't work perfectly. Sometimes you do get some water into your trachea, and what happens? Cough, right? You start coughing. Okay? That's because your body is expelling this foreign matter from your trachea so you can breathe. If you get a piece of food in your trachea, what's that called? Choking. When you're choking, something is lodged in the trachea, and therefore you can't get air into your lungs. Why don't you just breathe through your nose then? Yeah, they meet above that in the back of your throat. So something gets lodged in the trachea, you can't get that. Yes.
So if you stab something
So sometimes people have to have an emergency tracheotomy, which is when if somebody has some sort of blockage high in the trachea, they can make an incision here into this soft part, into the trachea, and then air can go into that rather than going in through the upper part of the pharynx. So just something. Sometimes people that have had surgery on their vocal cords or different types of cancer in their upper throat have to breathe through that. If you have throat cancer, smoke smoking can lead to higher risk of throat cancer. So that as the air goes down the trachea, it gets into this sort of top of your chest cavity, and it branches into two. Okay, in this model you can see the trachea comes down here, and it's hard to see because in here branches into two. Those two branches are the bronchi. They're pretty large. Yep, we're going to talk about that next slide. And those branches then branch into bronchioles, which branch into smaller bronchioles, and it's like the branches of a tree. Every time it splits off, it gets narrower and narrower, until eventually at the end of these tiny bronchioles are those air sacs we just saw, the alveoli. So alveoli are very, very thin. They're only a single cell thick. Try to see that here. They're single cell thick. There's about 300 million of them make up our lungs. And surrounding them are these capillaries from our blood. And I'll explain again, as we inflate our alveoli with air, oxygen can diffuse from that air into our blood, where red blood cells grasp onto it. At the same time, carbon dioxide from our blood can diffuse into the air that's in the alveoli, and then we'll exhale it. So if we were able to measure the levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide in the air that's coming into our lungs, it would be high air in oxygen, low in carbon dioxide. But then if we're able to measure our exhalation, the amount of oxygen will be what? Lower. Carbon dioxide will be higher. As we change the air as it comes into and out of our lungs. Now the alveoli can't expand and contract on their own. They have no muscle tissue. You need another muscle to allow that to happen. That muscle is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is like a sheet-like muscle. It's tucked up in the bottom of our rib cage. That really shows this is blue. So it's tucked in the bottom of our rib cage. It stretches, it seals off our chest cavity, our thoracic cavity, from our abdominal cavity. These two cavities are sort of separated, our chest cavity and our abdominal cavity, separated by this diaphragm below our rib cage. And we can contract and relax that diaphragm. So when we contract it, it tightens up and it kind of drops down. And what happens is it creates low pressure in our chest cavity, and so air is forced into our lungs. When we relax it, it decreases the pressure, okay, or increases the pressure in our chest cavity, and we exhale it. And so this diaphragm is what allows us to breathe in and out. Now it's under conscious control if we want it to be, right? Like right now, you're probably thinking about your breathing, and you have to like actually tell yourself to inhale and exhale. It kind of feels weird because then you have to think about it again. As soon as you stop thinking about it, your body takes over. And you just inhale and exhale on your own every few seconds. What do you want? Scientists don't really know. You know, yawning is contagious. There's
Because you yawned a second ago and then I yawned. That was on purpose.
That's a fake yawns actually make other people yawn. The sound of yawning makes people yawn. The sight of sound makes people yawn. We don't really know exactly.
What is it?
We don't really know.
What is it?
We don't know. Now you try and like contain it or hear your piece. Really yawn. A couple other things related to diaphragm. If you get hit in the back, you fall, you get tackled, you get the wind knocked out of you. What happens is temporarily for like 5 seconds or so, your diaphragm is sort of paralyzed almost. It's not working. So it's super scary, right? Because like that 5 seconds, you're like, oh my God, I can't breathe, and you're freaking out. It comes back, but so if it didn't, yeah. So no, if you didn't, you would not be able to breathe. So if that actually happened, you know, hopefully somebody's there to give you CPR or rescue breathing. So sometimes it does not work. Sometimes when people are paralyzed, the muscles that control, the nerves that control the diaphragm aren't working properly. There's a machine, a ventilator, which artificially inflates and deflates a person's lungs. Yeah, you see like in TV shows sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you might see on TV like they put a mask on someone and then they have like a big like squeezy tube thing. And it's just an artificial way of making someone breathe if they're not breathing on their own. It would be bad. Also hiccuping. Hiccuping is an involuntary spasm of the diaphragm. So you get this sudden change of pressure in your chest that causes you to make that weird sound.
What is that? How does that?
It just happens sometimes. We have a nerve that sometimes prompts that to happen. Certain things bring it on in people. Like for me, I eat spicy food. Like I like spicy food and I enjoy it. It doesn't like hurt me, but it gives me the hiccups. If it's really spicy, I always get the hiccups.
Spicy that doesn't have meat.
Spice and meat aren't related. Like I have like hot sauce on something or chili peppers. Taco or yeah. Crushed red pepper on my pasta.
On your pasta?
Yeah, right. All right, anyway, let's talk about some malfunctions of the respiratory system in humans. So bronchitis, you've probably heard of. Okay. So bronchitis is an inflammation in those two large branches of the trachea. So trachea comes down, branches in two to the bronchi. Bronchitis is when there's some kind of inflammation there. Often it can be caused by a bacteria. A bacterial infection leads to inflammation, leads to trapping of mucus and fluid in those areas, gives you, chest pain, hurts to breathe in and out. You might have a constant cough. Those are things that are indicative of bronchitis. So you can see that here. You can see the bronchi inflamed, and it can caused by lots of things. So bronchitis isn't necessarily caused by one specific bacteria or virus. It can be caused by several. So it's just what happens. It's sort of the symptoms rather than being. It's not asthma. So asthma is a condition that people develop when they're in the bronchioles. So now we're into the smaller branches of our respiratory system. So normally they're open and air can get into the alveoli relatively easily. When a person has asthma, the wall of those bronchioles is inflamed. And therefore the passageway inside for air to get into the alveoli is constricted somewhat. And so it might be a little bit more difficult to breathe just all the time on a daily basis. But there also then can be times when a person has an asthma attack, or more severe versions, because these bronchioles are also surrounded by muscles, smooth muscle tissue. Typically it's relaxed. However, if those muscles go into sort of a spasm and they tighten up along with this swollen, inflamed wall of the bronchioles, it makes the passageway into the alveoli even narrower, even more difficult. So a person with a very strong shortness of breath, okay, wouldn't be able to get as much oxygen to their blood, okay, might pass out, might have really struggled breathing. So a person that has asthma, there's daily treatments. So a person might take an inhaler every morning or twice a day in the morning, night, sort of to keep this condition at bay, to keep these airways as open as possible. Also, people have a rescue breather, which in case of an asthma attack, so a more sort of severe version, they might take this. Those medicines are called bronchodilators. That's the name of the type of medicine, which makes sense because their job is to dilate those tubes, the bronchioles. And so that's what those inhalers do. Now, an asthma attack can be triggered by different things. Sometimes it's exercise-induced. Sometimes people are exercising can induce an asthma attack. Other times it could be pollutants in the environment. People that live in areas of chronic pollution have a higher incidence of asthma. Could be caused by stress as well. So this tool is so this is like a tool that's used by a respiratory therapist or a doctor to sort of measure lung function, okay? And it can basically measures how much you're breathing in and out. Anyone are going to use these? No. So you can measure sort of your volume of inhalation and exhalation. And so obviously, if a person has lower lung capacity, can't take in the full volume of air, it's going to be lower. So there's also one where you blow through and it has a little meter. My daughter used to have to do this. She got allergy shots. And every day before she had to get the allergy shot, she has to breathe into this. And they're measuring her lung function to see sort of if it was improving as her allergy shots were working.
I thought that white thing.
So pneumonia is another symptom of typically a lung infection. So pneumonia is when the lung tissue is inflamed, and that leads to the accumulation of fluid and mucus in the alveoli. So obviously anywhere where fluid is filling the alveoli means that's not an area where oxygen can get into the blood. So as this fluid builds up, it's more and more difficult to supply the blood with the oxygen that it needs. It can be caused by lots of things. So again, pneumonia isn't like caused specifically by one type of pathogen. It can be caused by bacteria or virus, certain chemicals. The person's heart isn't working properly. They can develop pneumonia. You guys learned about the novel coronavirus, that it's associated with pneumonia as well. So it can be caused by lots of different things. Finish up. Other respiratory malfunctions. So smoking leads to the exposure in lung tissue of toxins that are found in tobacco. And one of diseases that comes about through extended exposure to smoking is emphysema. So emphysema means the alveoli lose their sort of elasticity, okay? That they're not able to sort of maintain their shape, and they become sort of deflated and much less able to absorb oxygen. Okay? It's most commonly caused by smoking, and it's pretty much irreversible. Can't be undone. Can be caused, though, however, also by other environmental contaminants. Constantly breathing air with different pollutants in it can also lead to emphysema. Cancer. We already learned what cancer is. It's a loss of control of the cell cycle when our own cells divide sort of out of control, forming tumors that are invasive and can interfere with the normal functioning of our body system. And so lung cancer is one common type of cancer in adults. We can develop cancer in our mouth, tongue, lips, throat. Things like chewing tobacco is another common risk factor for mouth cancer and throat cancer, because the tobacco has similar effects as smoking has on our lungs. Chewing tobacco has on sort of your mouth and tissue, your gums, tissues in your throat. And so chemicals in the tobacco actually can, over time, increase the risk that our own cells lose control of the cell cycle. Just like ultraviolet radiation and tanning can lead to higher risk of skin cancer, tobacco smoke and chewing tobacco have the same kind of effects, but on other areas. Lung cancer is one of the leading types of fatal cancer in the United States, but it can be caused by other things. We all, or maybe not anymore because people don't smoke nearly as much anymore, but we know people that smoked their whole life and never developed lung cancer. You also hear stories people never ever smoked, but they do develop lung cancer. So it's not like you can't quite say it is caused by smoking, but smoking drastically increases the risk of this type of cancer.